Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Canadian Concussion Center's webinar series that is sponsored by the Laborers International Union of North America, LiUNA. My name is Carmela Tartaglia, and I'm pleased to be moderating our webinar series developed for individuals that have suffered a concussion, their caregivers, and healthcare providers. If anybody's coming back, they'll see that Dr. Rotund isn't here. She wasn't available tonight, so I'm filling in. The sessions focus on various aspects of concussion and include an expert speaker presentation for the first half of the session, followed by question and answer period for the duration. The sessions recur every other week live on Tuesday evenings from 6 to 7 Eastern Standard Time. Tonight is our 25th session. If you missed any of the previous ones, you can view them on the Canadian Concussion Center website. For this evening sessions, we would ask that when you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A section as opposed to the chat. You should see the Q&A icon on the bottom right of your screen in the Zoom webinar application. Once pressed, a window will open up so you can submit your question. If you have any technical issues, please enter those into the chat section and someone will respond to help you out. So we're going to run a short poll, and this is to gather information on who our live viewers are. That is, are you someone that has suffered a concussion? Are you a healthcare provider, etc.? Momentarily, you will see a question pop up. Please review the choices and submit your reply. This information will help us to best plan for our educational initiatives moving forward. Thank you very much. So we'll give you a few minutes. And I'm assuming that Christian will take it down when it's done. Oh, he's saying 90%. Great. So for this evening sessions, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Charles Tator and Patrick Brown, who are going to discuss legal, legislation, and guideline issues. So we'll start with Dr. Tator, who is the director of the Canadian Concussion Center. He trained in neurosurgery and neuropathology and was chair of neurosurgery at the University of Toronto. He was chief of neurosurgery at the Toronto Western Hospital and was a founder of Think First Canada, a national brain and spinal cord injury prevention foundation, and Parachute Canada, a national injury prevention agency. He held 2 research chairs at the University of Toronto and is an officer of the Order of Canada, an inductee of the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame, and the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. Not too many doctors in that one. Currently, he's a scientist in the Krembil Brain Institute and director of the Canadian Concussion Center. His book on catastrophic injuries in sports and recreation was published by the University of Toronto Press, and his practice primer on concussions appeared in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. He is author of 437 publications in peer-reviewed journals. He's a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Neurotrauma and the Neuroscientist, and an associate editor of the Journal of Concussion. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Charles Tator.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Carmela, and thank you for pinch hitting for Dr. Rotund, who unfortunately can't be with us tonight, and she's been a major reason why this has been a very successful series. And we've already talked about that, and I thought you would be interested in our team of people. So you see we have a variety of people at the Canadian Concussion Center who may be neurologists and radiologists and psychologists and neurosurgeons. So that really is an indication of the multidisciplinary nature of trying to help people with concussions and trying to do some research in concussions. And I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of concussion. It is, as you know, a diffuse injury. There are no focal deficits. There's about 65 possible symptoms, which is quite amazing, and we're still discovering even more symptoms. It continues to be a clinical diagnosis. It's a very fast-moving field, and so things change. And for example, we used to call what most of you are suffering from, the post-concussion syndrome, but it's now known as persisting concussion symptoms. Can you see my cursor, by the way? I hope you can.
Yes.
And then psychological consequences of concussion are really quite frequent. In fact, probably about 35% of people have significant mental health disorders from concussion, which can be depression, anxiety, panic attacks, for example. Unfortunately, the long-term effects like actual brain degeneration are very uncommon. So you don't have to worry about that. A lot of new things have come along in concussion. We still have the same definition, but for example, we now stress recognition, which is something that we didn't do previously. In other words, we want everybody to be able to recognize when someone may have had a concussion. And we now focus on a whole variety of causes of concussion. So for example, motor vehicle crashes have turned out to be a significant issue. Intimate partner violence, significant issue. School-based concussions, significant issue. We now have concussion laws, which is really quite astounding. And we have many guidelines. Tonight, we thought we would explore the legal issues about concussion. And I've just put down some things that may be on your mind. And these are questions, for example, have been asked to me over the past year or so. So for example, why does my lawyer keep us waiting so long to get this thing settled? Why do I need yet another doctor's exam, especially another IME? Frequent question. Why is my lawyer sending me to a different therapist? What does my lawyer mean by catastrophic? I think my concussion is catastrophic. Why is he wondering whether it's catastrophic? And then sometimes we're asked nowadays, you should have a Spec scan, or didn't you have a computerized EEG? And most people say, I don't have a clue what those things are, and my doctor never ordered them, so why are you ordering them? So those are some of the questions. And where we need lawyers, in my view, is if you're in a major motor vehicle crash, you need a lawyer. If you have a fall at home, you sometimes need a lawyer. And as you know, those occur mainly in the elderly, and usually it's not a legal matter, but sometimes it is. If you fall down steps that don't have proper banisters, for example, and you're out somewhere where the steps weren't properly lit or you expected steps. In sports and recreation, there are a lot of times when lawyers are involved. Class action lawsuits, I'm sure you've read about those. Seldom need a lawyer for military action and blasts. In school-based concussions, and we're seeing a lot of people who get concussed in school, both youngsters who attend school and people who work in school environments, and lawyers are being involved. And for violence of a whole variety of types, especially the ones that we're so worried about now, partner violence or domestic violence is a huge problem. And in fact, our research seminar over this past few days, we had a wonderful session given by a doctor from Harvard, and who says that a quarter to a third of all women are subject to partner violence. Incredible. And obviously, if it's a criminal action, lawyers are involved. So I think I am going to stop there. Maybe I'll just show you one more interesting slide from our own research that you may be interested in, especially if you are listening and have had a motor vehicle crash. as a cause of your concussion. Here are some things that we didn't really know before. You know, you would think that very young people are the only ones that are crashing their cars. Well, in our series of 108 people who got concussions in motor vehicle crash, the average age was 40. So that's surprising. For example, in sports and recreation, the average age is about 25. And then here's another really interesting feature that we have not figured out yet, although we do have some clues as to why this is happening. And you'll see here that in the motor vehicle crash, 108 people, 79 of them were females and only 29 were males. So works out to 73% of motor vehicle crash caused concussions in our experience are women. Now, we think we have some clues as to why that is happening, but maybe this time next year, I'll share them with you. We're still working them out as to why this is the case, but it's quite amazing. And this shows you the value of doing research, that we wouldn't have really recognized that this was 3/4 of women getting concussed. And there are some other examples of this. For example, in hockey, women get concussed more frequently than men in terms of percentage players. Same is true in basketball. And there we think that one of the big factors is neck muscle strengthening, that women are less likely to have big muscles. Like when you look at the average football player, for example, the muscles are gigantic, but you look at the average women's hockey player, the muscles are not very well developed. And maybe that's something that women are going to have to worry about in more fields than hockey and basketball, especially if that turns out to be a factor in why women are being concussed so frequently in motor vehicle crashes. So I am now going to turn this back to Dr. Tartaglia, and she is going to introduce our special guest tonight.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Tator. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Patrick Brown, who is a partner at McLeish Orlando. He is one of a select set of lawyers who have been certified as a specialist in civil litigation by the Law Society of Ontario. He was voted into Best Lawyers Canada and listed by Lexpert as most frequently recommended by other lawyers. Patrick was elected and acted as president of the Ontario Trial Lawyers Association and was previously nominated as one of Canada's most influential lawyers in Canadian Lawyer magazine. He initiated the most comprehensive coroner's review of pedestrian and cycling deaths in Ontario. This led to widespread changes in laws and infrastructure to make our roads safer. For his work, he was awarded the Active Transportation Champion of the Year by Toronto Centre for Active Transportation. He's also the recipient of the prestigious 2018 Professional Award from the Ontario Brain Injury Association for his outstanding support of individuals living with the effects of brain injury. Patrick proudly sits on the steering committee of Friends and Families for Safe Streets, which he helped create. He is the former director of Cycle Toronto, Toronto Cyclists Union, founder of Bike Law Canada, and head organizer of the Vulnerable Road User Coalition of Ontario, which fights for new laws to protect victims of road violence. He is committed to the highest form of advocacy for his clients and working towards safer communities. So I'll hand you over to Patrick Brown.
Hey there, Patrick. I think you just need to unmute your microphone.
That's better. Sorry about that. People like when the lawyers get muted. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Dr. Tator, and thanks, Dr. Tartaglia. especially that introduction. I'm a lawyer. My background is already indicated is primarily in lawsuits involving people with different and associated injuries. And unfortunately, I do have far too many cases involving concussions. And those can be in part connected to other types of injuries, but they unfortunately happen far too often. People who sustain concussions don't necessarily need lawyers. I mean, as Dr. Tator's already indicated, 75% go on to recover within 1 month. And there unfortunately is a certain portion of individuals who don't go on and have their symptoms resolve. And as a result of that, it causes them a lot of difficulties, and it can have a widespread impact not only on their family, but on their social relations, but returning to sport. But for many as well, it can impact their jobs and having income coming to their homes. It can impact their caregiving. So it has a widespread outreach if the symptomology seems to last and go on. And if you have a diagnosis, as Dr. Tator's indicated, with the persistent concussion symptoms, then that can have a huge impact on you. And unfortunately, when that does, you may have to talk to a lawyer. And hopefully some of my points today, I can help you, give you some understanding of how a lawyer may help, how a lawyer may not help, and some things to watch out for. Obviously, there's a wide spectrum, as Charles has already indicated, that happen to people and how concussions can happen. And I can touch a little bit just on that. Where lawyers can come and help. And firstly, we know that the physicians, the neurologists, the neurosurgeons, the neuropsychologists, the occupational therapists, they're all out there trying to help, and they're helping you with your symptoms. But while they're helping you get better, you may need additional help. And for instance, you've got the Brain Injury Association of Ontario, other brain injury associations in your locales that I'm sure many people use, and they're available. They're not for profit. You've got your OHIP base, which might take you to, UHN or another hospital or another treating medical practitioner, and that's covered by OHIP, and that's great that we have a system like that. But then once you get outside of that, you might need some other help. So for instance, if you're no longer able to go back to your workplace, you might need, and we love acronyms, as you can see, but the STD is short-term disability. And when you go off work because of a concussion and you have symptoms and you're not able to return immediately, you're likely at work going to have group benefits and you're going to have some short-term disability. And for the most part, people collecting short-term disability don't have lawyers. They collect it. It's usually not litigious. It's paid through human resources and you're looked after. As well, your workplace also has to accommodate you. If you have a disability and you're suffering concussion type symptoms, then that can be disabling, and they do have to accommodate you on that as well. If your concussion persists and you're out of income, you may need long-term disability benefits, and those are generally paid, again, if you're at work and you have group benefits, you're going to have likely a long-term disability plan. You might have a privately funded one that you purchased, but in any event, those kick in at a certain stage, usually after several months, 3 months before you can start collecting long-term disability. They're test-based, meaning the insurance company wants you to meet a specific test. Usually there's one test up for the first 2 years where you're not able to go back to your regular employment. And then the second test after 2 years is you're not able to go back to any type of employment based on your education, training, and experience. And in that type of system where you've been denied a benefit, you've applied and they've denied you, you're going to likely need a lawyer. WSIB is just workman's compensation. That's different. If you're in a workplace and you're covered and you're in the course of employment, many people fall into this category. They have concussions, but they could find themselves limited only to dealing with WSIB if the event took place at work. And again, in order to determine that, you should talk to a lawyer. You get into more social nets like Ontario Disability Support Plan, Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Plans. These are really just trying to get you income into the family unit, but generally they will get an assignment that you have to pay them back if they do pay income supplements to you. And then, as Charles has already indicated, we get into the car crashes and you get into a lot of different benefits called accident benefits or insurance benefits, statutory accident benefits. And those are under an insurance policy when you've been in a car crash. And the intent is there's no fault benefit. So it doesn't matter who's at fault, but we're going to try to get you some medical treatment. We're going to try to get you some rehab. We're going to pay you these benefits and hopefully get you better and back to working. And then there's lawsuits, and that's what I do. I sue people. Yes, unfortunately, people have slip and falls. They have elderly that fall. And sometimes in those falls, it's because somebody wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. We call it negligence. They didn't put the salt out. They didn't properly put the person in a wheelchair. They didn't do a proper transfer. The person's hit their head, they're concussed, and now they have a disability. Slip and falls. You can get sports-related injuries. As Charles has indicated, there's some new laws, but laws have always existed that in certain sporting events, whether it be at school or otherwise, there are certain standards that follow. There's standards that are followed by the coaches. There's standards in relation to the utility, the places that the sport's being played, what equipment's being used. And if any of those standards or they fall below those standards, could give rise to a lawsuit as a result of a concussion. Large portion are car crashes, of course. Far too many car crashes, whether they're crashing into each other and there's victims inside the cars, or they crash into bikes and people riding their bikes, or pedestrians. Unfortunately, the latter two, those are increasing. People actually getting injured in cars are decreasing. It's a problem. It's primarily because a lot of people put a lot of effort into protecting people inside cars with technology, but not so much for those vulnerable road users. And then school-based litigation. This is where somebody may be in school, there's been a substandard or a standard that's not followed. They have a lot of standards in school boards that have to be followed. Teachers have to follow certain standards, and certain sports and recreational activities have to be followed. Assessments of individuals and their abilities have to be followed. Ski trips. All these can lead to a potential claim where someone suffered a concussion and give rise to a lawsuit there. So as you can see, us lawyers have a lot of areas to cover where we stay in business, but it should only apply unless you need a lawyer. So if you're in one of those individuals that are fortunate to have a recovery, that you are better, and then it may be in your best interest to stay as far away from the courts as possible. And I'll talk to you a bit about that. But this is just a general overview of where lawyers can step in to assist people. Not on there is CPP disability benefits. That's something as well you can apply for if you have a severe and prolonged disability as a result of a concussion. And again, that is to supplement your income. You don't have to be 65. You can apply for that well before 65. The other area that's not in that chart is employment law. Employment lawyers, human rights complaints. If they're not accommodating you because of a concussion, you have a disability, then employment lawyers can assist obviously in those areas to help you get the accommodation you need, or potentially lead to other types of lawsuits involving your employer. So do you need one? Well, as I indicated, you don't need one if you're better. Certainly in lawsuits, if your condition, your symptoms have resolved, then you may not need a lawyer. And really, a lawyer is going to be the one that should guide you as to whether you need their assistance or not. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them and find out what your rights are, because there are notice periods. For instance, if you fall on ice, you have to give the city certain notice in a letter. So even if you feel like you're going to get better, you don't know. So you should talk to a lawyer to get that notice out. Maybe you're not sure if you should be in WSIB or outside of WSIB. So talk to a lawyer, they'll guide you through that. And as well, they'll guide you about limitations, meaning Hopefully you'll get better. But by the way, if you are going to pursue a lawsuit, they'll tell you what the limitation is, meaning if you don't sue by a certain time, you're going to be out of time. So how do lawyers operate and get paid? Well, for instance, a lot of the employment lawyers, they're paid by the hour. Criminal lawyers are paid by the hour. But lawyers who do lawsuits based on injuries like concussions, they work on a contingency basis. And that just simply means they're only going to charge you at the end of the case, and they're going to only charge you if you're successful, and they will attach a certain percentage to your award. So a standard retainer could be at the end of the case, the lawyer's going to charge you 30% of what's awarded to you in money. Then because you won that case, the court's also going to give you legal costs or a portion of your legal costs. And in fact, that goes back to you to reduce that 30%. So you do get to keep the cost. And these retainers, if you really want to check out where your rights are, go to the Law Society of Ontario. They have sample retainers of what lawyers have to follow. And that gives you a really good guide to make sure that it's a proper retainer, especially if it's a contingency one. What to look out for? Hey, listen, you got to look out for everything, but no matter what, look out for yourself. Make sure that you feel that it's comfortable, that you think you need a lawyer, that you get the proper representation, that you actually talk to probably more than one lawyer, especially if you're looking at retaining one. There's nothing wrong with going and talking to others. When I say what to look out for, you've got a lot of people on television, a lot on radio, you got them on backs of buses. Just because you hear their name all the time doesn't mean they're good at what they do. Many people who do lawsuits on concussion cases or injury cases have a specialty in that area. It's a specialty given out by the Law Society in civil litigation. Check to see if they have that. There's some legitimate peer review sites online like Lexpert where other lawyers would vote on who they would refer someone to. Check that out. There's Best Lawyers, also a peer review site where other lawyers would say, that's who I would recommend you go to. Again, you've got other type of peer review ratings, which might help you in guiding you through who to look for. Ask around as best you can who's good in the industry and follow that, and you'll hopefully get and land in the right spot. Some things, and I'm going to talk a bit about lawsuits, but this has everything also to do with disability claims, benefits, other aspects where you suffered a concussion and you're either dealing with an insurance company or you're dealing with litigation in a lawsuit. First thing, anybody who comes through my office and they report concussion-related symptoms, and that's the nature of the injury, it's been shortly after the crash, I will tell them that it's best to wait and see. Number one, to follow up with their practitioners and wait and see to see if things resolve. Because there's no sense commencing a lawsuit if you're one of those 75% that have your symptoms resolved within 1 month. So there's no sense going right out of the gate with a lawsuit when you really don't know if this is something that's going to resolve in 3 or 4 or 5 months. And for the most part, if things resolve in 3 or 4 or 5 months, you don't have a good lawsuit, certainly from a car crash. You might have a lawsuit for some amount of money in other types of activities, but it's not going to be necessarily significant. So a lawyer will generally and should tell you, we're going to wait and see how you do. Now, the other thing that you should remember is you got to report your symptoms regularly. So after you have a concussion, as Charles has indicated, there's 65 symptoms that you could be experiencing. Well, you've got to go and report those to your medical practitioners. And the reason you do is because if you don't, and let's say things don't resolve in 3-6 months, and you have this long-term disability or a set of symptoms that persist and now are going to impact your life, well, you don't want an insurance company or a defense lawyer saying, well, you didn't say anything right after the fall, or you didn't say anything to anyone right after the crash. I don't think it has anything to do with the crash. I think it has to do something with this or some other thing that happened in your life. So it's very important, number one, to report your symptoms on a regular basis to a medical practitioner. And in that process, most of you will think, oh, I've got this as my worst symptom, and that's all I have to report. You should do a holistic list of your symptoms and let them know everything that's going on with you. Whether it's your hearing, your smelling, your brain fog, whether you're irritable, all these symptoms which the doctors will tell you that you should report, you should make sure. You got to follow up with treatment, because if you don't, the first thing someone in a lawsuit is going to argue against you is your own worst nightmare. You didn't try to get yourself better. You didn't mitigate your damages. You didn't follow up with treatment. Therefore, we're not responsible for your lack of recovery. And that is a defense that's advanced. You have to be proactive in our system. Our medical system is one where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And if you feel that you're not getting better and that you need to see someone else, or there might be some other specialist, talk to your doctor. Ask them, is there anybody else that might be able to help me? And be proactive in the system, because that's how our system works. I will tell you the one thing I tell all my clients: you want a good lawsuit, you be honest from throughout. If you have some pre-existing head injuries or conditions, make sure you tell everybody about that. Don't try to hide it thinking that you're going to have a better lawsuit, because that doesn't work. Honesty, honesty, honesty will always enhance your lawsuit, will always enhance your disability claim. And if people tell you otherwise, they're giving you bad advice. Ignore bad advice. Okay, Joe the neighbor doesn't necessarily know how a good lawsuit will work out. So that is kind of some of the pointers I give you all. Why do I say that? Because in concussion cases, unlike someone who's broke their back, broke their arm, they are subjective complaints that you are going to be making. They are going to attack your credibility and suggest that if they're not telling us the truth about this one small thing, they were dishonest about that, then how can we believe them on everything they talk to Dr. Tator about? And if they didn't tell Dr. Tator the truth, then how can we accept Dr. Tator's opinion about the diagnosis? So credibility is key. That's why you have to be honest throughout, because these are cases based on subjective complaints. There's not a lot of objective evidence. Unfortunately, many people with concussions don't have positive imaging in order to point to. They do look at, and it's changed a bit, but insurance companies, defense lawyers, and those people that have to pay out these claims, including WSIB, look at concussion cases with suspicion. They come out of the gate that way, and it's because it's subjective complaints. They will also use validity testing in their neuropsychological assessments. You could find yourself being sent to defense insurance practitioners. They're going to send you through a battery of tests. Part of those tests are to see what they would say are validity testing, whether or not you're telling the truth. Always try your very best at those tests. Don't try to outthink it. Don't try to give the answers that you think are the best, because if you do, you're going to fail some of those validity testing, and that's how they attack you on these cases. You may face allegations of malingering, which is a psychological diagnosis that simply says you're lying. When you're facing allegations like that, your lawyer has to treat that very aggressively, because it is a defense that could ruin your case. And I just throw it out there, if they're suggesting it, your lawyer will be treating it with a significant degree of response. The one way you can really enhance your cases, whether it's a disability claim or a lawsuit, is you have people around you that know you before and they know you after. They know how you functioned before, they knew what you did, how you lived your life, how you were social, how you were productive, how you hiked, and they know what happened to you after that, and how these concussion symptoms are in fact impacting you. And those people are key to assisting you, ensuring that people know that your life has changed. And so make sure you keep a good list of those and give them to your lawyers. Can't emphasize this enough. Just because you see that they're a head injury clinic and they've got that sign across their, wherever they are located, doesn't mean that they're good at what they do. You have to have the right professionals in your corner. And when I say that, ask around. Just like I said about the lawyers, who's good in the industry, talk to your family doctors, find out who does treat concussions well, and make sure you get in with the right people. Those are kind of my quick pointers. I hope I'm not too long. I probably talked a lot. I'll try to answer any questions I can. Charles, I saw your questions and I thought they were all good, and I'd love to answer those right now, but I'm open to how you want to proceed further in relation to question and answers.
Great.
Um,
Thank you. Charles, do you have a question?
well, I think it's a good time to let the listeners ask some questions. And, I've got 10 or 20,000 questions I can ask Patrick, but I would like to give everybody else a chance before I ask them.
Okay, let's because some of these actually were posted quite a while ago. So somebody asks, do persistent concussion symptoms qualify as a disability for benefits, like for disability tax credit?
They should, just like any other disability. It's disabling, it's persistent, it's ongoing, and it can have a huge impact. So yes, depending on you have the right evidence to support in your application, it should, yes. And that would be
Okay.
applicable to any type of benefit.
Okay. Somebody asked, despite the fact that our rear end accident was not a severe one, I have significant ongoing symptoms more than 4 years after the accident. The other side suggests that the accident damage to our car was not severe enough to cause a concussion. Does the car that hit us have to be going more than a certain speed to result in a concussion?
No, I mean, that's a medical, we run into this all the time. And people can have concussions from coup, contra coup type actions, and the doctors can explain what's going on with the brain on a coup, contra coup. But when you're hit from behind, with the head moving back and forth and the brain moving within the skull, you can have axonal shearing, you can have all kinds of different things, and you don't have a lot of property damage on the vehicle. Those can be just as disabling where there's a lot of property. For instance, we see some cases where you can't believe somebody walked out of that vehicle, and oddly enough, they didn't have any injuries. They're fine. But at the same time, we have other people with little impact or damage, but can have significant disabling conditions like concussions that persist. So, but you are going to be attacked on it, because in lawsuits involving car crashes, the defense insurance lawyer will always file a jury notice. And they do that because they know when your court case comes up, it's going to be tried by 6 people, okay, that you don't know, that are off the street. And in that trial, what they're going to do is you're going to call your evidence from your doctors. You're going to call your before and after witnesses. They're going to tell about how this has impacted your life. And then in front of that jury, they're going to show a picture of the little dent on the back of your bumper. And they're going to suggest to that jury that little dent couldn't have caused all that. And that is a tactic that's used because we know juries can come around and be very, very nasty on those types of facts, even though it's not real. And that's why they file those jury notices. That's why there's a lot of advertising about fraud, vehicular fraud. And as a result, juries are really tough with cases like that. They are. You really have to have it built up well. You got to have the right professionals in your corner. You're going to have some people, engineers. We marry up engineers with medical doctors in order to prove and counteract that allegation, and that they will say precisely, no, this can have consequences. And there's lots of studies on it, but they go both ways. They go both ways. So anyways, those are tough cases, but you're in for a tough ride.
I'd like to weigh in on that a little bit. We're not finished our analysis of our more than 100 cases that I mentioned of car crashes and concussions. I've already told you that women get more concussions than men in that circumstance. But I will tell you that we are especially concerned about rear end collisions. And I think you've already alluded to one of the issues. What is the speed at which there was a rear end collision? And the speed can be a very important factor because of the amount of acceleration of the brain. In other words, the jiggle of the brain inside the head can be significant, in my view, even at about a 10 kilometer per hour crash. In other words, if you're stopped at a red light and someone plows into you at about 10 kilometers per hour and your head is set in motion, you can get a concussion. Now, if you're clobbered, stopped in traffic on the 401, completely stopped, and somebody crashes into you at 100 kilometers an hour, which happens. Can you imagine the way your brain is moved around by that? And I think those details are really important. And as Patrick has already said, the details are really important. So you keep track of all those details, and we're trying to go backwards now and collect as many details as we can retrospectively, which is never as good. But things like accident reports, be very clear when you're doing your accident reports. You may go to the accident center, you may go by tow truck, or your mother or father may take you, or your son or daughter may take you, but keep track of those details and take pictures. Like we're putting together a picture gallery of our crashes that we're documenting. All of that is very important, I think, in determining why you are having so many symptoms from concussions and motor vehicle crashes. The number of symptoms is equal or greater than, for example, in sports and recreation, which is really, really something, an eye opener for us.
Yeah, you know what?
Thanks for that.
I shouldn't say everything about juries have gotten better. Like 10, 15 years ago, concussion cases were even more difficult. I think that the public is getting more educated just on what concussions are, how they can be disabling. Certainly the judges hearing the cases get it. They do. But the juries are still evolving on it. And I think from public education, it's helping, and they do understand that they can be disabling, and understand that the impact doesn't necessarily have to be great, especially with medical evidence to support that. So things are getting better, but we still see the same tactics employed against us on cases as explained by this individual, where it's low impact and very little property damage.
Right. There's a question here, which I think brings up a number of issues that probably other people are also considering. So Stacy Anderson says, my case settled last December. I was forced to settle poorly. I failed some of the catastrophic areas based on insurance doctor lies. My first Spec scan showed minor low blood flow, top left. On the second one, it showed normal. My lawyers got scared. I talked to a few doctors. Spec scan is not to be an end all, as I still suffer the symptoms. My lawyer explained the insurance companies are in the politicians' pockets and that it's very difficult to get a catastrophic rating. Insurance companies don't want it ever to come to trial, where Spec did give precedence. My case, I didn't get to rebut the doctor's lies with the adjudicator. I was told I could if I went to trial, but my lawyers didn't think I was a good bet, so I was forced to take less than what I need to get me back to me. It doesn't matter how bad the concussion is, as the other ratings bring down the catastrophic rating.
Yeah, like, I
I
mean,
guess, yeah.
I think where the question's coming from, and just to give it some context, is if you're in a car crash or any time a vehicle's involved, you fall into the no-fault benefits. And these were the benefits I talked about that are available following that crash. You're generally from your own insurance company. And you're entitled to a certain amount of benefits based on the degree of injury they define you at. And so if you're at what's called a minor injury, you're only going to have $3,500 worth of rehab and medical treatment available. And that's why it's very important when your doctors are filling out disability certificates to make sure that they mention concussion, because that should take you out of the minor injury. And then that puts you into what's called the category of non-catastrophic. And that's the second category. And that category gives you $65,000 worth of medical and rehabilitation benefits for 5 years. And then the last category is called catastrophic. And if you're deemed catastrophic, well, then all of a sudden you move from 65,000 up to $1 million of benefits to treat you for your rehab and medical needs. And that's a dramatic jump, as you can obviously understand just by the quantum, but it also is available for life. So over the years, they've developed these tests as to who's going to be catastrophic and who is not. And they're done at different times. And I think what you're looking at is a test that's dealing with positive diagnostic imaging at a specific time frame and in certain settings in hospitals. And it's too much for me to get into. But obviously it was litigious, and it looks like you went to a hearing, and unfortunately they found you to be non-catastrophic. I don't know the facts behind it to really tell you, and I wouldn't even try to get close to that, other than to say being deemed catastrophic has been becoming increasingly more difficult. They've made the test very difficult, especially initially. You almost have to be in a vegetated state before you're deemed catastrophic right out of the gate. But there are different time periods where they're going to reassess your disability, where you might be catastrophic. And you need lawyers that understand that. You need to have professionals that know how to do those assessments. And you have to know that those should be done at certain stages. We have a whole department that looks after that, and that we review them. And then we have different specialists that give us our various ratings in order to have people deemed catastrophic. So it's a little bit too much for me to get into where you are with that, but that's what that's about.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment on the Spec scan because it is not a diagnostic tool. And I guess we have a lot of patients who get into this problem is somebody tells them to go get a Spec scan, and a Spec scan could be abnormal for various reasons and could be normal. And since it's not a test for concussion, can't rule out a concussion, can't diagnose a concussion with it. But as soon as somebody gets a normal Spec scan, a lot of times this is what happens. The case gets thrown out. So patients should be really careful about getting a test that actually is not even, warranted for concussion.
Yeah, I think that was one of your questions, Charles, about your lawyer sending you to one. And there are different imaging that lawyers may try for different purposes, which are generally trying to fit into these specific definitions that were put into the law. And they're trying to find ways in order to get the person deemed catastrophic. But the referral should come from a medical practitioner. And the whole idea of Spec scans, as you know, is right now up in the air within not only what we call the License Appeal Tribunal, but also has come into a huge issue in front of the courts, as well as whether or not it's an acceptable type of mechanism to diagnose concussion. And I think they're coming to the same conclusion that Dr. Tartaglia just indicated.
And Rachel asks, I heard there's a 30,000 deductible on injury settlements. Is there any way to get any compensation under $30,000?
Yeah, that's in reference, when you have a lawsuit, you're gonna get three sets of damages. You're gonna get your pain and suffering and then loss of enjoyment of life. You're gonna have your loss of earning capacity, and then you're gonna have what's called future care costs. Those are the three main areas. You're talking about the very first one, which is called pain and suffering. Unlike the United States, we don't have multi-million-dollar pain and suffering awards. In fact, the most you can get in Canada is $385,000 for pain and suffering. And our Supreme Court said that is restricted to the most egregious type of injury, such as severe traumatic brain injury or quadriplegia. Everybody else falls below there. So from the stub toe at 0 to the quadriplegic who needs, ongoing care, at 385, everybody falls into that range somewhere, depending on the nature and extent of their injury. So they didn't want everybody suing for little whiplash type strains and sprains. So they said, before you can sue for pain and suffering, firstly, you got to meet this test that is a serious permanent impairment. But secondly, if you don't get above $136,000, we're going to take approximately, it's indexed, why these numbers are kind of fluctuating, but we're going to take approximately $36,000 away from you. And they call it a deductible. And the intent of that was to drive insurance premiums down for people to drive cars. So you're correct. If you're below 140,000, they're going to take approximately 36,000 as a deductible. So if you went to court and you were awarded 25,000 in pain and suffering, you would get 0.
Good to know. And somebody asks, those websites you were talking about for peer review, I guess I know one was Lexpert.
Yep. Lexpert,
And the other one?
Best Lawyers Canada. You can also go
Best
to the
Lawyers of Canada. Okay.
Yeah, you can also go to Canadian Lawyer. They do an annual survey of best law firms where lawyers vote. Yeah, those are, and then the other one to see if they're a certified specialist is just the Law Society site.
The Law Society of Ontario.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carmela, I forgot to show the slides that I meant to show from OBIA. OBIA is the Ontario Brain Injury Association, and their executive director, Ruth Wilcox, I asked her to send me some slides that they have on their website. So if anybody wants some help in figuring out, which type of lawyer, for example, you need, there's a very good chart of what lawyers do. And it doesn't name particular firms, but at least you'll know, some of the criteria that you should look for in a personal injury lawyer. So please go to the OBIA website, which is obia.ca, and you'll see a very useful chart on features of personal injury lawyers that you should look for.
Yeah, and they'll have a
Okay,
whole
great.
list of questions asked too that will help you in that.
Right.
when you're
Okay, good.
interviewing.
Well, since it's 6:55, we're nearing the end of the evening sessions. So we're going to forward you a short survey by email to obtain feedback on tonight's session. So please let us know, as your thoughts and input are very important to us and very much appreciated, so that we can design future sessions. Our next and final session before the summer break will be actually Tuesday, May 24th. It's going to be Dr. Leslie Rattan, who's going to be interviewing a patient panel about their recoveries from concussion. So please join us then. And I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing their knowledge about this. And if you have any questions, burning questions, you can ask them now, or else we'll just call it an evening. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Patrick one more question.
I don't know if
Sure.
that's allowed, Charles.
Tell us about IMEs. Patients are particularly bothered by having to go for countless IMEs And apparently they're directed to do that by their lawyers. So can you just give us your
Yeah,
views
no,
about
that's
IMEs?
okay. Firstly, I don't like the word IME, but here's what an IME is. Supposedly, it's an independent medical examination of the individual. As
Yeah.
soon as you put yourself out there and you actually make a claim for, let's say, an insurance benefit, or you put yourself out there and you have a lawsuit, the other side, usually an insurance company, will say that we're allowed to go on. You have all your doctors that you've seen, and they've told us what they think about your condition. But we want to have the right to send you to our doctors. And then they have a list of different doctors that they like to send people to. And that they call them IMEs, or independent medical evaluations. And you have to go. For the most part, your lawyer will tell you that, but for the most part, you will have to go to what they call an IME and be assessed by one of their picked doctors. And when I say picked doctors, they definitely have rosters, and you get on a roster for a specific reason. You don't get on a roster because all your reports seem to favor perhaps an insured person or the person who's disabled. You might get on a roster because they like what they hear and they don't have to pay out. Now, that's not all of them. That's a few of them, and they're being recognized by our courts as maybe not so independent. And yeah, it's the way our system works. And I'll be the first to say it's not perfect. Alternatively, they'll say, hey, Pat Brown, he sends it to doctors that he knows are going to provide opinions that are favorable to that lawsuit. And that's their reasoning on the other hand. And they hope by having these two diverging adversarial type opinions that somewhere the truth is found. And I'm just not sure if that's the case. I'm very surprised that the medical profession is so divergent on issues like concussion, but they are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining. And actually, there is one last question. Somebody says, I'm 4 years post motor vehicle accident. When will my case be settled?
Yeah, well, right now the cases, well, 95% of cases, lawsuits settle and they don't go to trial. But you want a lawyer that does do trials, but 95% don't. Those 5% that go to trial, right now we've had a backlog. We've had 2.5 years where there's been really no cases going ahead. In our judicial system, firstly, the majority of lawsuits involving these types of cases are jury trials filed by insurance companies. They want a jury trial. Number two, the priority of trials go to first. Criminal trials are first on the list. And then the second priority is family law trials. And at the very bottom are civil jury trials. And so we've always had a backlog historically. Now we've had 2.5 years of nothing moving. So as you can imagine, unfortunately, the system is fraught with delay. And I wish I could tell you that at 4 years, you're going to have a trial soon, but unlikely. It's a backlog system. It's a parking lot full of cases that are not necessarily moving forward, unfortunately.
All right. Well, on that happy note.
I wish I could say that your case is going to settle soon, and I really hope it does, and some do and some don't. But if it's headed for trial, yeah, and you don't have a trial date yet, you're going to be waiting.
Yeah, sounds like delays in everything with COVID not helping things.
Thank you,
All right, well,
Patrick.
Anyways,
thank you,
so much.
Patrick. Thank you, Dr. Tator. And thank you for all the people who attended. And, there's still a few hours of sunlight left, so I will let you guys all go. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.